Hello, and welcome to Publishing Essentials for LitMags, a series of webinars created to deliver a foundation in business skills for arts, literary, indie, and other small magazines. My name is Joyce Byrne, and it's my pleasure to produce Publishing Essentials on behalf of the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association. In today's lesson on advertising sales, we are pleased to welcome Trevor Battye, the founder of Trevor Battye Advertising Sales. Trevor has been providing client-driven advertising and monetization strategies for festivals, events, and media brands for over 15 years. His clients include the Alberta Teachers Association, the Tyee, and the Vancouver Writers Festival. In addition, he is a sessional instructor in the publishing program at Simon Fraser University. Welcome, Trevor. Over to you.
Thanks, Joyce. My name is Trevor Battye, and I have an agency called Trevor Battye Advertising Sales, where we focus on working with magazines and festivals to help monetize their audiences and develop advertising opportunities for their publications. It's really great to be here. I wanted to take a moment and thank Joyce for the invitation, and also thank AMPA for inviting me as well. It's always great to be part of this series. Today, we're going to talk about what are the advertising basics that you need in order to start selling. We'll go through some sort of basics of how you would sell advertising. So if you've never sold an ad before, this is for you. So as a starting point, it's important to first identify what are we selling. And really at a basic level, what we are selling in magazine advertising is access for the advertisers to that audience. In order to do that, we need two really basic things. One is a media kit, and the other is a pitch letter. And the goal of your media kit is to describe the audience to potential advertisers. I've got an example here. This is Brick's media kit. It follows kind of the general format that I recommend for a media kit. So you want first page, bright colored title page. This is really to give people a sense of your brand. And then when we dive into things, I always recommend to people start with a publisher letter. In your publisher letter, you want to try and do a few basic things. Introduce the magazine, talk about the history of the publication. In this case, Brick's been around for 46 years. Talk about any highlighted authors that you have. Michael Ondaatje, who many know in the Canadian literary circles, was a former editor of Brick, and so they talk about that. Other big names you have editorially is important. There's a whole bunch of them in the case of Brick, so we take advantage of that. And talk about what the purpose of the magazine is, and then also highlight any unique opportunities that you have for advertisers as well. So in this case, Brick talks about their YouTube channel. They also talk about book fairs they go to, and they also talk about what is the reason why you'd want to advertise. Again, the point of advertising is to reach those readers. In this case, we also included a testimonial. Testimonials are great, and it's a great way to demonstrate to new advertisers that you have confidence from your existing advertisers. I always say it's challenging if you're starting a magazine from scratch to get those first advertisers in, but once you get the ball rolling, we've worked with the Literary Press Group for a number of years, so it was great to get a testimonial from them. The Literary Press Group, for those who don't know, is a group of publishers that work collectively together, and so it's great. It's a great way to build confidence in the brand, having an association provide a testimonial. Next, we want to talk about audience. Brick's audience is really literary, intelligent, discerning, and socially engaged folks. And then we got all this from a recent readers survey. How do people engage with the magazine? So 50% say that they plan to pursue further education in the next 2 years. 22% give brick as a gift to their lit-loving family and friends. 16% have bought a book, right? They're making buying decisions based on brick. 70% have purchased a book by a contributor that appeared in brick, and 69% of brick readers are also writers. And we'll come back to that. That's a unique thing that occurs in literary magazines. A lot of our readers are also writers in some capacity, whether that's aspiring writers, have been working on a novel for quite some time, et cetera, et cetera. Next, we get into distribution. So this audience that you have that's being reached by your magazine, where are those folks? And again, highlights that are unique to brick. In the case of brick, we have a 7% overseas audience. We also have a 28% American audience. Then we get into pricing. Pricing is really dependent on the size of your publication, and everybody's going to be slightly different. So you want to think about putting your pricing up there fairly early on to give people a sense of, okay, how much is this going to cost? Then we get into ad spec, what the size is, what the deadlines and the schedule are, that kind of thing. And then one of the things that's really important with your issues is, what are your distribution highlights? So we're reaching readers on newsstands and we're reaching subscribers via mailed subscription copies. But what else are you doing as a magazine? What are those other activities that are going to add value to your advertisers? The AWP, as it's known, Conference and Book Fair. They also celebrate Indie Bookstore Day. They also, in the summer, then do a summer launch. They're at the Eden Mills Writers Festival and Word on the Street, as well as the Brooklyn Book Festival. Then we have digital opportunities as well. And we'll talk more about digital and bundling in the second half of this presentation. But with any media kit, you want to give people a sense of what are all those opportunities, not just print, not just digital, but everything you can deliver for advertisers. And then lastly, we also have a brick podcast and brick social channels. Again, we've got some testimonials, this one from a reader, which is really great, and who's also a writer. And so again, just filling out what are all those different ways to engage with your audience. We don't get many ads on the social or the podcast, but again, you never know when somebody's going to come to you and say, oh, hey, I noticed you have a podcast. Would you take ads in that? Better to plant that seed, be ready for that sale or that advertiser to come to you, than have it sort of living dormant on the site and then be caught sort of trying to scramble and figure out what the opportunity is going to be. Better to sort of prepare for that opportunity by putting it in your media kit. So that's the media kit. Next, we move on to the pitch letter. A good pitch letter is really going to lay out basic information for your advertisers, recognizing that for a lot of people, they're going to skim your media kit. They're not necessarily going to read every single word. I generally encourage people to start a pitch letter with, what is the opportunity and what specifically do you think that advertiser should be promoting to the brick audience and when, right? The easier you make it for people to advertise in your publication, the easier it's going to be for them to want to advertise. We also, in the case of brick, we like to give people the editorial lineup. Again, as much information as you can provide to people in your editorial lineup is great. So who are those big names that are going to be featured in the issue? What does that look like? And then generally as well with this, I also include a copy of the digital publication if there is one, because you want to approach a pitch letter as if that advertiser hasn't heard of the publication, right? Imagine you were explaining your publication to somebody who was literally from another planet, had never picked up a copy before. It's sort of the introduction to the publication. And so what are all those opportunities? We also get into different packages. Again, we'll talk more about that in the second half of this presentation, but it gives you a sense of what all the opportunities are at different price points, because you never know what people's budgets are. And then a schedule. So what are the deadlines? When do people need to get content to you, and when will that content actually come out? Different pitch letters can present this information differently. I try and also think that people's time and attention when it comes to their email is pretty precious. People are inundated with email. So, the more information you can pack into the first couple of paragraphs, the better. And then just go from there and see what people respond to. So we have those two elements to demonstrate what we're selling. Your media kit does all of these things. So introduce the magazine to your advertiser, describe your audience to the advertiser, and again, as much information as possible there, and tell your advertiser what the opportunities are to engage with the audience with pricing. Those are the three big things. I also encourage people wherever possible, and you saw this in the brick example, to include as many pictures as possible with people engaged with the magazine, reading it, giving it to a friend. If you're at an event, if you're at Word on the Street or somewhere like that, take lots of pictures of that and include those in your media kit to really bring the publication alive for folks. And then in a pitch letter, provide your advertiser with deadlines, include booking artwork and publication date, provide your advertiser with pricing options. Again, how much is this going to cost? And make that information as easy as possible for advertisers to read. I tend to like bolding that information, or putting it in a different color also works really well. Some people say, oh, I don't like bold. Can you just put the information in a different color? Cool, fine. And then lastly, provide your advertiser with as much editorial information as possible. I know sometimes this can be a challenge because editorial's like, well, we're still figuring it out. You really have to try and encourage editorial folks to give you as much information as possible. As you saw in the brick example, I don't need to know what certain authors exactly are going to be talking about. But even in a literary case, is it going to be a poem or is it going to be an essay? If it's going to be an essay, like broad strokes, what's the essay going to be about? Once somebody's decided to include an essay from a particular author, they have some sense of what it's going to be about. And the more information you can include, the better. Okay, so now we'll move on to who are we pitching? And this is just sort of a crash course in who we are pitching. I want to make sure that people understand it's going to be different for every organization. And so part of the upfront research you do once you identify somebody who's going to be a good prospect for advertising is to identify in that organization who's responsible for the marketing. Typically, that's going to be a marketing director, but increasingly we're seeing publicists play a role in advertising decisions. Particularly, I do some work with the Tyee, and we have a number of publicists that are pitching editorial, but are also involved in making those advertising decisions or part of those advertising conversations. And those folks have turned out to be real advocates for our publication. Again, because they see editorial coming from us at the Tyee, they're able to advocate for advertising buys. And I always say to people, the higher up in an organization you can start, the better. I have definitely started with publishers of different organizations or VPs of marketing, CEOs in some cases, because it's always easier to start at the top of an organization and work your way down. If you think about it, if you start sort of at the low end of the organization, one of the problems with that is that inherently, whoever you start with, they have to go to their boss, and then their boss has to take it up the chain. Whereas if you start at the top of the chain, it's often easier. Often a VP of marketing can make a decision a lot quicker than a marketing director or a marketing assistant. So it's really a question of figuring out who is ultimately responsible for making those decisions and making sure you get in front of them as opposed to trying to start at the bottom and work your way up. It just makes life a lot easier. So that's sort of the mechanics of who to identify. Often these people will be listed on a website, but you also want to think about like just calling an organization and saying to somebody, hey, who in your organization makes decisions around advertising? And quite often when you call folks to ask them, they'll tell you right away. It's not some great secret. It's often not on a website to spare those people's inboxes. But if you call the organization, again, if you've done your homework beforehand and hey, we're pitching this specific thing that's related to content in the magazine, audience, all those things line up, it's going to make everybody's life easier. And the more information you have going into a pitch, the better it's going to be for everybody. Timelines. Let's talk about timelines for pitching. Now, again, this is a rough timeline. I sort of thought about it like, what does my typical week look like? So Monday, identify prospects and send email 1 with Media Kit. If you can mail magazines, I also recommend doing that. Mailing magazines is a pain in the butt, frankly. But again, if you think about the fact that you're approaching these pitches like the person has never heard of your magazine before, and where magazines continue to do well in media, in my opinion, is they're beautiful, right? They're gorgeous. They're often award-winning design, or they feel great. You've spent all this time with your printer figuring out paper stock and trim size and all the rest of this stuff, right? You might as well get it into people's hands, because once they hold your magazine, typically if it's a quality product, people will fall in love with it and be like, oh, that's really beautiful. Yes, we'd love to advertise in that. So email goes out day 1 once you've identified prospects. Sometimes, depending on the project, I take a day and line up all the prospects and then send the emails. Do that first. Wait 2 business days. Waiting 2 business days is just something I've always done. You want to give people an opportunity to read your email or not, depending, but you want to give people time and have a little faith that they're reading your emails and they're thinking about it. Then generally I suggest people call. Now, calling is getting more and more difficult. People working from home, people not, wanting to take phone calls. The phone call is going away, but I still do think it's worth phoning, or at least trying to phone people if you can get a phone number. Also, typically when you phone, it's an opportunity to figure out and answer some of those questions like, who does the marketing? How would I get a hold of Dave in marketing? Like, what's the best way to reach them? And they'll say, oh, email. Okay, well, I did send Dave an email, so I'm just wondering, like, if we could follow up about that. I still stand by the line when you phone somebody. If you get an office manager, a receptionist, anybody like that, saying, oh, I'm just following up on my email, or I'm just following up on an email that I had sent, or I'm just following up on some email correspondence we've had, right? Then at least you can get to a voicemail prospect if you've never talked to them before. Just following up on my email, Dave, would be really great to connect on this. We think it's a great fit. I put a copy in the mail to you. Just wanted to make sure you got it. I don't know where the copies go. I'm still amazed that sometimes you'll send copies to a prospect and they'll be like, oh, never got it, like Do they all end up at reception where they're being read? I have no idea. Anyway, if you can't phone people, you can also then wait a week and send another email and just, following up on my previous email. And ideally in that second email, you provide an editorial lineup or highlight some of the distribution that's going to go on. And then third email, 1 week prior to booking, just to say, hey, booking is coming up. I don't know if you've seen my other emails or not, but if you wanted to take advantage of the opportunity, you've got about a week to make a decision. Again, hopefully between the second email and the third email, editorial will have come through with more details, or marketing will have figured out some cool new things that they're doing that you can include in that email. And then sort of fourth email at the booking deadline, day or two before the booking deadline, last call. What does that look like? In or out, Dave, time to go, and just see what you get. So in the next two slides, I've kind of mapped out two scenarios. One where somebody wants to book, and we'll talk about what you need in an insertion order. And then one where they don't book, and like what can you do then? So booking, yes. Insertion order. You want to cover these three things in an insertion order. So, and I didn't provide one because everybody's different, but you can create a basic Word document or a PDF. But if you don't have Adobe, you can do it in Word, totally fine. Size, price, issue, discount if you're offering any kind of discount. Cancellation policy. Cancellation policy is really important. What are the rules around cancel? How many days do they have to give you if they want to cancel? How much of the fee for the ad do they get back if they cancel within a certain period? I generally recommend to folks, if they cancel before the booking deadline, they get most, if not all of that back. If you cancel after the booking deadline, what percentage do they get back, right? Because now you've got this hole where their ad was supposed to go. That takes a bunch more work from everybody. What does that look like? And then last, but certainly not least, payment terms and instructions. So if the person has never advertised with you before, do you need some kind of deposit? Yes, probably you do. If you want a deposit, how do you take that deposit? Who's responsible for taking that deposit? Make that as easy as possible. Ideally, you identify somebody in the office who's there and will answer their phone, who can take a credit card number. Maybe some of you have payment portals on your website. I know some publications have been able to modify their payment portal to a drop down where instead of buying a subscription, you're paying an ad deposit. I am not a technical person. Check with your web developers and people in your accounting department to see how they think it best be issued. I have yet to meet an accounting person who doesn't want to take people's money up front, because we all know the horror stories of chasing people for payments. Don't need to get into that here, but make sure it's really clear and easy for people what those payment terms and instructions are, so that they can easily pay you and there's no challenge about that. So that's the good news, right? Booking, yes. Send them an insertion order. Also include on there where the artwork goes and who's responsible for that. When do they need it? Remind people when they need the artwork and where does it go? And you'll be getting reminders from this person. I try, as I'm sending the insertion order, to connect whoever's responsible for artwork. I try and connect them to the person sending the artwork so that we can just make all that really clear and easy. The less confusion, the better. So all of that information is laid out. And then, does the person have any questions? Here's who to talk to in accounting if you have questions. Here's who to talk to in artwork if you have questions. And of course, you could talk to me if you want to. If you have any other questions, I am here. At the end of the day, this is still very much a customer service business. Okay, so then we move on to the not so good news. This is the why. Why aren't they booking? And I really encourage people to ask if they're not booking, if you get through to somebody and they say, thanks for sending this, we're going to pass at this time, then it's a question of why. And you don't want to be angry when you do this. I've definitely had a bad day every once in a while and been, and said to somebody, well, why not? Come on. Like, it's so easy for you to do this. Like, why aren't you going to advertise? You don't want to do that. Never ask in anger or frustration. The question really is like, why not? And it's important. It's an opportunity to get feedback from your advertisers around like what isn't right for them, what aren't you delivering that they would like to see. Where are they focusing ad dollars? Are they buying, you know, big billboards? Are they buying, transit opportunities? What are they buying? And really start a dialogue around like, well, what could we do differently, or what could we deliver differently that might turn your no into a yes. A lot of times I will coach this in, why aren't you advertising? I'm asking because I will get this question when I go back to our publishers. They will ask me, well, why isn't so and so advertising? I really thought that was a great fit. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the idea that we all have a boss, right? We all have a job to do. Marketing people are meant to buy ads, and market their brands and their books and their festivals and their products. And so, we're meant to sell advertising to them. But I think actually very rarely do people wake up in the morning and go, what I'm going to do today? I'm going to buy some ads. Like, that's not the highlight of marketing director's day is, I bought some ads today. Yay. They want to do the big, launches of things and all that. But it's just important to keep that dialogue going as a touch point. And again, and I can't stress this enough, don't be angry when you ask. I've definitely done that, and it's not the way to go. Again, empathy, like, oh, sorry that didn't work out. What can we do to make this an easier opportunity for you? Sometimes it is price, and we'll touch briefly on discounting. We'll talk kind of more about this in the next session when we get into bundling. But it's important to note, whether it's the current state of the economy or anything else going on in the world, particularly for small literary magazines, most of your advertisers are going to be nonprofit arts organizations or book publishers, and they will ask for some kind of a discount. So what do you do with that? I think generally it's important to offer something, and then also, anywhere between 10 to 20%. I don't generally start with 20% right out of the gate. I tend to, start with 10. Okay, what size ads are they buying? If you're buying a whole year's worth of full page ads, that's going to be worth more on the discount side than if you're buying, a 1/6 smallest ad, whatever that is in your case. If you're buying a 1/6 ad one time, standard discount for arts nonprofits is, somewhere between 10 and 15%. I also think that, it's a real opportunity when people ask for a discount to value add instead. And, can you pay full price for that ad? But if we have the room in the book, can we make that ad a little bigger for you? Can we give you some additional digital with that? Just so that, we're not losing the money, as I say there. And also, during these discussions, I think it's important to remind folks as well, hey, we're also a nonprofit, or we're also a charity if you happen to be a charity, or we're all in this nonprofit boat together. We understand that you're a nonprofit arts organization. So are we, right? What does that look like? And again, we'll talk more about this in the second piece. It's important to think about digital as an opportunity to value add, and be really clear with folks. We'll give you this e-newsletter ad, or we'll give you 2 or 3 that has a value of X, right? So if your e-newsletters are $150, we'll give you 3 of those. That's a value add of $450. If you're only paying, $600 for a 1/6 of a page ad, I'm making that up. If we're giving you an extra $450 of value add, that's a pretty significant value add. We're making your dollar go further. That concludes the first part of this. If you have any questions, my email will be available for folks who watch the presentation. Feel free to email me, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the second half. Thanks so much.